Okay, welcome to EKU. Some of you must be not from EKU, but I'm Dr. Mike Collier, for those of you who don't know me. I'm the co-director of Bluegrass State Intelligence Community Center of Academic Excellence, and we're honored today to have Dr. Rob Farley from University of Kentucky here today to talk about careers in foreign affairs, which is near and dear to my heart since that's the professional community I came out of before I became an academic and got my PhD in international relations, and then somewhere along the line I got morphed into a Homeland Security professor. But Dr. Farley is from the UK Patterson School for Diplomacy and International Commerce. Those of you who are not familiar with international affairs schools like that, they're one of the top ones in the whole country. And so getting into it's a very selective program, and he'll tell you about that today, what you have to do to get into the Patterson School and what you can do after you graduate. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Farley.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I may be developing a bit of a cold, so if when I speak I'm talking a little bit too low, then please just wave an arm or let me know if you can't hear. As Dr. Collier suggested, I am a senior lecturer at the Patterson School of Diplomacy and International Commerce. I've been there for 11 years. And what we're talking about today is really two halves. The first half is going to be about graduate education more generally if you are interested in a career in international policy in foreign affairs. And for the second half, I'm going to talk specifically about what a Patterson career can do for you or can help you to achieve that professional goal. And really, I think Homeland Security is most definitely part of this broader, right? The reason we need Homeland Security is because there are things that threaten the homeland, and many of those come from outside of the United States, right? So which is a response to a need for defense and security. So the first thing I want to talk about just briefly is the kind of careers that one can get in foreign policy, foreign affairs, out of an undergraduate or a graduate program. When I decided to go to graduate school these many years ago, which would be something like 19 years ago that I made the choice, I didn't know a lot about any of these. I was from the West Coast, and the West Coast is detached from policy in a lot of ways. There aren't many schools that are like Patterson or like SAIS or Fletcher or some of our competitors that do the sort of thing that you find on the East Coast, or at least in the Eastern time zone. And so I didn't know that much about the kind of careers that people had when they were focused on international affairs. But the kind of careers that people do have are really some genuinely exciting and interesting stuff, right? Stuff that brings them into the international arena and then allows them to pursue some kind of career both inside the United States and outside the United States. One of the most obvious of these is a career in the State Department. Many people who work for the State Department are part of the Professional Foreign Service, so FSOs, Foreign Service Officers, but not everyone. There are lots of jobs associated with the Defense Department, and this is not necessarily uniformed military. These are civilians working with military in many different capacities, working inside the United States, outside the United States, on improving U.S. defense. There's the intelligence community, 17 or so agencies that have different alphabetical designations. I'm sure you know many of these, right? But these are all organizations that in some way focus on international affairs and on defending the United States from a variety of different threats that the United States can face. And these are available to people who have undergraduate and graduate degrees. There are foreign affairs jobs in the legislative branch, right? Every legislator, every senator needs someone who focuses on foreign affairs. This is especially true of legislators who don't know anything about foreign affairs and don't care anything about foreign affairs. Often these people need more help from the people who know something about the international system, the international community. And from there, people find staffer jobs, they find jobs with the permanent administration of the legislature, and then they find their way into the broader ecosystem of foreign policy. There are private firms, lots of multinational companies. It says so in the name, multinational company, which means that the company works all around the world, right? Not necessarily everywhere, but in a lot of different countries, and it needs people with it who are going to staff its capabilities, both inside the United States and elsewhere. Domestic firms. How many people have heard of a company called Big Ass Fans? A few people, right? When I recently gave a very similar talk to this in Michigan, and the whole idea of Big Ass Fans was quite strange to them, right? What is it? it's a company that makes big fans. I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. So Big Ass Fans has been hiring people out of our school, but also out of other international schools recently, because it wants two things. It wants to expand its marketing internationally, and it wants to expand its supply chain internationally. And it needs people who can do risk assessments. It needs people who have knowledge of foreign affairs, of international trade, of international politics, and of the domestic politics of foreign countries in order to be able to make good decisions. Right? Sometimes companies hire people inside the company who can do that, and sometimes they outsource to specific risk assessment firms. But again, these are the kind of jobs that people can get where they have an immediate impact on foreign affairs. Finally, there's what I call the public-private nexus, which is a nexus of think tank jobs, non-governmental organizations that focus on development, human rights, tons and tons of other stuff, and journalism. Journalism has become a profession which is more focused on specific interest areas rather than on the craft of journalism itself. So it used to be that we had professional journalists who then go out into the world and then figure out what they want to do. Now we have more people who specialize in a specific area and learn how to be journalists. That's the way we're trending. But there are lots of people who go to the kinds of schools I teach at and get the kinds of education that I'm talking about who have jobs like these. Right? And it's a lot of interesting stuff. Now, who knows what this map is here? It's the most important map in all of foreign affairs.
It's the DC Metro.
It's the Washington, D.C. Metro map, right? And this map right here, no matter what you do in here, and I'm certainly there, if you work for Big Ass Fans, you're not necessarily going to need to know the D.C. Metro, although it's going to help. But almost anything you do here is going to involve a close, intimate working knowledge of this map right here, which is to say how you get from Maryland to D.C. back to Maryland. Right, where these are in Virginia, where the Pentagon is, where all of the think tanks are, how to get to Capitol Hill, where you can live in D.C., where you can work in D.C. Because the career of many people, in fact most people who are pursuing any kind of objectives in foreign affairs is going to lead them to Washington, D.C., because this is where stuff happens with respect to international affairs. In fact, if you follow people on Twitter who focus on international issues, international questions, you will find every morning when there is a red line outage, right, there'll be dozens of people complaining about the red line not working. And these are people that you need to follow for policy reasons, right? And it's because these communities are concentrated in this area, concentrated in Washington, D.C. How many people have been to Washington before? Obviously. I never visited Washington, I think, until I was 28 years old, something like that. So I was a real latecomer to visiting Washington, D.C. So there's a lot here. There's a ton of stuff that I didn't know about when I was thinking about graduate school the first time, which is how I ended up with a PhD. So graduate school, like any other life choice that you're going to make, involves lots of positives and negatives and potential positives and negatives. The positives are things you probably know about, right? You learn things, right? One thing you learn is subject matter. So you learn things about things, right? You study Russia, you learn things about Russia, and at the end you know more things about Russia. You also study in any sort of credible graduate program methods. So you learn how to learn things. You learn how to know things. That's essentially what methodology is. It's methodology in terms of research, if you're thinking about original research, but it's also methodology in terms of evaluating the claims that other people make. Right? So every graduate program is going to include some kind of methodology, and that's generally going to be some combination of quantitative and qualitative methodology. Right? And even if you don't like doing those things, you have to do them because they teach you how to know things. Second thing that a graduate program does for you is credentials. Now, credentialing has a bad name in a lot of ways because it sounds like something you just have to jump through a hoop to indicate that you have been to college or that you've been to graduate school. But in fact, it is much easier simply to write the letters MA at the end of your name or at the top of your resume than it is to talk 7 pages on what you can actually do, right? Because people assume that if you were able to make your way through an MA program or through a PhD program or through a JD program that you then know how to do these other things, right? It's a shortcut for employers. It's a shortcut for people who would want to hire you that indicates to them that you can probably do certain things, for instance, and then you'll have to prove that you can do those things to the employer. They already know because you have that degree. And there's community. And this one is extremely important, right? Your community, the people you go to school with, people you go to graduate school with, whether it's law, a PhD, or a master's degree, are people that you are going to work with for the next 20, 30, 40 years. Right? 20 years ago, I went to graduate school at the University of Washington. 16 people were in my cohort. I'm probably still Facebook friends with 12 of those. And that was 10 years before Facebook was even invented. Right? These were people that I kept in touch with, and they're people who affect my professional prospects. Right? If you go to Patterson or Fletcher or American or a law school or any schools like this, getting to know people and getting to create a professional community, a community of people who are interested in the same thing you are interested in, is one of the most important goals you can have, because those people are going to be with you for a very long time. Those are great. Those are positives. The negatives. Graduate school takes time, and I'll talk a little bit more about the details of the time in the next slide, but it takes time, right? And what that means in the most vulgar of terms is that after you leave graduate school, you are that much closer to being dead, right? You have that much less life available to you, that much less of a career available to you, and that's worth thinking about when you're thinking about graduate school. You have debt, right? Not always, the debt does not always come in sort of clear student debt terms, right? That you took out this much of a loan in order to go to graduate school. Although, goodness knows, I certainly did, and I certainly still have student debt. But the debt also comes in terms of the foregone earnings for what you would earn if you had not gone to graduate school. Right? So almost anybody, even people who have their entire way to graduate school paid, which is the case in a lot of PhD programs and in some other programs, you are giving up other earnings. And it turns out that you can make more working 40 hours at Starbucks than you can at a graduate program, even a very good graduate program that is paying your way, right? So you are foregoing earnings in return for getting something else. But then there's uncertainty, because graduate school does not guarantee anything. There are always risks involved. And I would say 8 of the 10 best students I've ever had at Patterson, which is almost 400 students now, have gotten fabulous, interesting jobs that they wanted. 7 of the 10 worst students that I can remember who graduated from Patterson have also gotten really interesting jobs. But then there are a few who don't, right? And whether it's luck or whether it's something else, it doesn't always work out. And so being willing to consider that degree of uncertainty when you're making a decision on whether to go to graduate school is important. And it's also important with respect to what kind of graduate school you want to go to, what kind of program you want to go to. So you've decided to go to graduate school. This leaves you the question of, what do I want to do? What kind of graduate degree do I want? All 3 of these here, doctorate, master's in law, can feed you into the international affairs job process. All of these have their ups and downs with respect to specific kinds of careers in international affairs, but all of them can get you in there, especially if you choose the right programs. And that's particularly the case with law, but it's also important with doctorate, because there are some doctoral programs that don't focus so much on career-oriented things. They're very focused on academics. But to start with the doctorate will take you from 4 to 7 years in most disciplines that are relevant for a foreign affairs career. This includes political science, international studies, a few others along the way, sometimes history, sometimes not, but a few other programs, public policy certainly. 4 to 7 years, people are trying to shorten that with some degree of success. You develop advanced professional skills, state-of-the-art skills with respect to research, with respect to some degree in writing. You do develop state-of-the-art writing skills. State-of-the-art academic writing skills are different than saying you're a good writer for a whole bunch of different reasons. But they're still important to have, right? And you'll get those out of a PhD program. You'll develop a focused research synthesis. You will be among the people in the entire country who know the most about your topic. Your topic may be very narrow. It may be a keyhole eye view of the world, but you'll know among the very most on this topic, because you are creating original research. In fact, that's the whole point of getting out of graduate school with a doctorate, is original research in terms of building a dissertation. You'll develop a community of academics. People who are doing the same thing as you, who have the same interests as you, and who know the same things as you, and who know what you're capable of. That's an important professional community to have, but it's different in some ways than a more professional foreign affairs community. And you'll have immediate credibility, right? You will walk into a place and someone will introduce you as doctor, and being introduced as doctor gets you credibility, even when it shouldn't get you credibility. I just saw Dr. Strange last night, and if you've seen it, right, he's very serious about being referred to as doctor, and there's a reason for that, right? Because it's about credibility, right? And having a PhD gets you credibility, even in situations where perhaps it shouldn't. But it's 4 to 7 years, right? It's 4 to 7 years, it's a lot of your life, and there's a lot of uncertainty. What about law school? Well, law school takes a lot less. It's 3 years. It generates legal skills, legal research skills, which are quite a bit different than academic research skills, legal writing skills, which are so much different than academic and so much different than anything normal human beings call good writing. But you are part of a legal policy community. There are some people who go to law school with the idea that they really want to be lawyers. Law is what they want to do. But that's not the case with everybody who goes to law school. There are a lot of people who go to law school because they want to be part of a policy community. They want to do policy, they want to do politics, they want to work for the government or for a major firm in some fashion, and they think that law school is the way there. And to some extent it is, probably more 30 years ago, even 20 years ago than it is now, but there are still very clear avenues from law school into policy communities. Not as much international policy. Right? You have to be careful about the law school you go to if you want to focus in international policy, because not all of them do. Not all of them do. In fact, the University of Kentucky, as an example, it does not do all that much in terms of international law or introduce you to an international policy community. So you have to take care with what your choice of law school, but you can find your way into those communities, those policy communities. And law has a big advantage over PhD in that you have 1 to 4 more years of professional development than you do if you did a PhD, right? Because PhD is 4 to 7 years and a law degree is 3, right? You're out in 3 and you're out actually making money, and you're out actually building a professional resume and building a public policy profile in a way that a PhD isn't, and that's a relevant consideration. Then finally, the one that I do, which is master's degree, 18 to 24 months. You develop professionally oriented skills, you have the sort of skills that people who want to go and be bureaucrats in the federal government, whether in the intelligence community or DOD or Department of State or anywhere else, are supposed to have. Moderate research synthesis, which is to say you know something about something. Not everything about something, but something about something. Professionally themed writing skills, which again are different than academic writing skills, are different than legal skills. A community of people who's interested in professional development. So professional, the sort of people who all want careers in foreign affairs, who know that you want a career in foreign affairs, and who are willing to work with you on that. And you have even more time for professional development than you do for law school, right? Because master's program generally does not go beyond 2 years, which is 1 year shorter than a law degree, which leaves you a lot of your life left over to do the things that you want. Now, I'm going to pause really, well, maybe even not so briefly at this point, and ask, are there any questions, broad questions about these 3 options right here for finding your way into an international affairs career, right? If you want to be an English professor, get a doctorate in English, right? But for finding your way into an international affairs career, are there any questions about these? Go ahead.
My question is about the NGOs and multinational corporations. You obviously talked about early on with the slides about most people starting a foreign service career through the State Department or associated entities in DC. Is that something that multinational corporations and NGOs look for before they will look at you as a serious candidate?
Not really, no. There are some that think there are some MNCs and other businesses that take governmental experience really, really seriously. But I wouldn't say that it's the bulk of them. There are a lot that are just sort of interested in people who display international skills, international knowledge, who display business skills and business knowledge. And there are some dual degree programs. There are some, for example, we have a dual degree program between the MBA, Masters of Business Administration, and our degree at Kentucky, and there are some others that are like that. And those tend to be really good for people who are focusing on the MNC route. Now, down career. So 15 or 20 years. So you've done FSO for this particular amount of time, or you've done DoD for this amount of time, or even intelligence community for 15 or 20 years. There are going to be multinational corporations and other kinds of firms, even domestic firms, they're going to be really interested in what you have to offer. And they're going to be interested because of the sort of skills you've displayed, but also because of the connections that you've created while being in these places. NGOs, it is also the case that you will see downstream hiring like that. So something after somebody's had some sort of professional service, public service career for a while, you'll get into NGOs. But I would say that's probably even a little bit less so than MNCs. There are a lot of people who just pursue a career in NGOs, development, human rights, whatever, and go straight into it after getting a master's degree or getting a PhD. Or for some, like human rights, a JD, right? Because human rights is a very sort of legally oriented field. Public service isn't necessary, really, to getting into an MNC or into an NGO. Are there other questions? Anything at all? Super. So that's the first half. The second half is the Patterson School of Diplomacy and International Commerce, which is where I happen to work. The Patterson School, and I have to have this graphic up here because, again, I gave this lecture in Michigan recently, and in Ohio and Indiana. And when you give this in Michigan and Ohio and Indiana, even in Ohio, people have no idea where Lexington is, which is kind of shocking. It's not that far away from Ohio. It's certainly not that far from Indiana. So, and West Virginia, right? People in West Virginia have no idea where Lexington is. So, which is disappointing, right? Because Lexington is a 350,000, 400,000 person city. People are also a little bit surprised in talking about Kentucky about the degree to which the Kentucky economy is globalized. It certainly wasn't apparent to me when I moved here from Seattle, Washington. Seattle is a deeply globalized city because it's right on the Pacific Rim and is a trade hub with the entire Pacific Rim. And so I was surprised by the degree of internationalization in the horse industry, but it is extraordinarily internationalized if you know anything about the horse industry in Kentucky, with money flowing in from East Asia, tons and tons of money flowing in from the Middle East, lots of money and people flowing in from Europe as well. The automobile industry in Kentucky is obviously deeply internationalized with the existence of TMMK and all of its subsidiaries. The bourbon industry is vastly more internationalized now than it was 10 or 15 years ago, primarily because of the huge popularity of bourbon in Korea and Japan and in other parts of Asia, and China's really sort of coming onto that now. It had not occurred to me that chicken was going to be a particularly international industry either. But KFC is huge around the world, and there are people that we have had and we have graduated who go to work for Yum, and they do things like managing KFC around the world, not in terms of managing a restaurant, but in terms of managing supply chains and managing procedures, doing risk assessments, doing diplomacy. And of course, the energy industry is inherently international, right? We will see what will happen with the coal industry, but one of the big reasons that coal industry is having problems is because of international competition. So things that happen around the world affect the energy industry here, and the energy industry here is thus dependent on broader trends in the international. So almost everything that Kentucky does in terms of its economy and its major industries is international, right? And our senators and representatives reflect that to a great degree. The Patterson School itself was founded in 1959 based on a grant from James Patterson. James Patterson was the first president of the University of Kentucky. He left the grant in his will in 1910, and it took 49 years for the grant to mature and to allow for the founding of the Patterson School. And there's a statue in front of Patterson Office Tower. It's on the University of Kentucky campus, which I'm sure many of you have visited. How many people have visited UK in the past? Right. It's a lovely campus. This is a lovely campus. You will find some buildings on this campus that are identical to buildings you'll find. The office tower over there is essentially identical to the Patterson office tower. There's another one at WKU as well. It offers a terminal master's degree in foreign affairs. And what a terminal master's degree is means that you expect this to be the last degree that you'll get, at least for the time being. So it's not a stepping stone to a PhD or another kind of degree. We concentrate on preparing students for careers in national and international service. We focus on the international part, but we do a fair amount of the national part as well. We have a 30 credit hour program, which in graduate school terms is 10 courses. So generally speaking, over an 18-month period of time, you'll do a 4-3-3 load or a 3-4-3 load or a 3-3-4 load for your 3 semesters at Patterson. We have a comprehensive examination system, and the comprehensive examination system means that in the last week of your time at Patterson, or what we hope would be the last week of your time in Patterson, we lock everybody in a room and give them a test for 8 hours. So they have to write on 5 questions. And then the next week, we put them through an oral comprehensive where they have to answer questions from faculty for a good solid hour. And we're all looking forward to that because it's only a few weeks away right now. So it's always an exciting time at Patterson. Patterson, about 35 students a year. People always ask how many people apply, and the answer is it varies a lot depending on the economy. More than anything else, the economy is what drives graduate school applications. So when there is hiring, people tend to go to graduate school less. When there is less hiring, people tend to go to graduate school more, right? Because people are very sensitive to those kinds of costs. Where do students come from? About 40% from Kentucky, 10% from abroad, really all over abroad. And we used to have a lot of Central Asia. That's less so now because of a variety of changes, but Latin America, Europe, East Asia. 25% from the academic common market, and the academic common market is the entire American South other than North Carolina, but including Texas. So if you can claim, if you're not from Kentucky, but you can claim residence in any of those states, that's a good thing from a financial point of view. And 25% from points north and west, which are primarily Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana, but there's farther afield. So to go back to the energy example, for example, we not long ago, I guess actually 2 years ago, had our first 2 applicants from North Dakota. Why were we suddenly getting applicants from North Dakota after all these years? Oil and natural gas boom in North Dakota, which meant A, that people in North Dakota suddenly had tons of money, and B, that they were suddenly interested in how international energy markets functioned, which they hadn't been 10 or 15 years earlier, right? So they were interested in our energy security programs. Where do we put people? Well, geographically, a little bit all over the place, but primarily in Washington. We also have communities of alumni in Lexington and Frankfurt and elsewhere, but primarily in Washington and then around the world. The sort of jobs that we create are intelligence community jobs, which is what we used to be particularly known for and is less so today. Not that our numbers have declined, but that we've stepped up in other areas. State Department, Foreign Service officers, private enterprise in a variety of different enterprises around the country and the world. State government, we put plenty of people into Kentucky state government, less so in other state governments, but a lot into Kentucky state government. The current agriculture commissioner is a recent graduate of the Patterson School. And by recent, I mean 2005. But he is a graduate of the Patterson. Lots of non-governmental organizations. That's especially the case for students who focus on development, human rights, and other things. So a little bit all over the place in terms of where our students come from and where they go. I should also note that this right here is going to be pretty similar for almost any other competitor program of Patterson. This right here will be quite a bit different depending on where each program draws from, as you would expect. The faculty, we are at 4 faculty right now. We have an open search, and so we should be getting back to 5 faculty, and then a number of adjuncts. Ambassador Kerry Kavanaugh was career foreign service. Before he retired, he did work extensively in Russia, the Balkans, and the Caucasus. Dr. Kathleen Montgomery is a developmental economist. She's currently working on agricultural development in Afghanistan and comparative agricultural development in Afghanistan and in Western Africa. Myself, I focus on national security and defense questions. Dr. Gregory Hall, who is our newest faculty member, and he is not featured here because this is last year's picture, and he does international organizations and transnational relations. We recently hired him, brought him in from Morehouse University in Atlanta. The adjuncts include Dr. John Harlan Bacchus, who is an economist, Senator Max Wise, who was a member of the FBI before he retired and became a Kentucky State Senator and now teaches our intelligence classes, a lot of our intelligence classes. And Professor Ying Duan Rogers, who does extensive work on commerce with China and other countries, but particularly with China, and advises a lot of corporations around Lexington on relations with East Asia. What do you learn at Patterson? And again, this is going to be similar in a lot of other MA programs. With PhD and JDs, these things will be different, but this is similar for a lot of MA programs like Patterson. So not an exercise in credentialing, nor a pathway to a PhD, right? And there are some master's degrees that are that, but we are not. We have a number of different majors: diplomacy, security intelligence, development, international organization, and international commerce, and the minors are all of those, plus some extra departmental programs. Some people do agricultural economics. Some people do a variety of other cobbled together majors, Russian studies or something like that, depending on what they can find in terms of the offerings of the University of Kentucky and other areas. Most interesting to me, because I didn't get any of this when I went to graduate school in a PhD program, were the sort of skills that we try to develop. So we develop presentation skills. And this is not a great PowerPoint presentation, but the idea is that you will learn how to write great PowerPoint presentations. People hate PowerPoint. They hate PowerPoint, and they hate it for really good reasons, but it is still the lingua franca of policy. And you can't get past PowerPoint for some reason. Writing. We try to teach you not only how to write short and how to write with impact, and we do focus on short writing. You're not going to write a 50-page research paper at Patterson, because that's not what we do. 3 to 5 page papers, 1 to 2 page papers. We teach you how to use buzzwords. And when we say use buzzwords, we don't just mean avoid buzzwords. Sometimes it's good to avoid buzzwords. Sometimes you have to use buzzwords because there's a particular community that you have to be speaking to, and they will understand the things you write in terms of buzzwords. And these right up here, there's a fantastic Central Intelligence Agency monster manual online that talks about a variety of buzzwords, and I encourage you to Google it. Project evaluation. This is one of the things you'll be doing at any junior level with just about anything. Teach you research methodology, teach you how to evaluate if whether projects, whether grant applications make any sense at all, whether they're going to be productive at all. And finally, networking. We teach you how to make friends and influence people. We have an etiquette dinner where we teach you which fork to use in a formal dinner. We teach you that you have to snip off the little labels on your jacket and cut the vents and so forth, which a lot of people don't know when they get to Patterson. So, and it's an important thing to know. Now finally, because financial considerations are important, we are a state school, which means that the state foots an extensive part of the tuition at the University of Kentucky, and that's true whether or not you are an in-state student. So even for out-of-state students, tuition at state schools tends to be lower than tuition at private schools. And we are one of the relatively few kinds of our program that are at a state institution. And so you can see the advantage of going to a place like Patterson versus the advantage of going to some of the other genuinely outstanding schools that also do the things that we do. And this is particularly the case if you can be part of the academic common market. Right? So being part of the ACM makes Patterson an extremely viable option from a financial point of view. I will also add that almost everywhere else that has one of these schools is vastly more expensive than Lexington, Kentucky. The cost of living index in Lexington is about a 91. The cost of living index in Washington, D.C. is, you may have a guess, hazard a guess. What's that? It feels that way. It feels at 155. 155. Now, Washington also has a metro, so you can get around Washington, D.C. without having a car, and I wouldn't recommend trying to get around Lexington without a car. You can do it, but I wouldn't recommend it. So even that's a little bit misleading, but you can also expect to have an apartment that has space in Lexington, in which in Washington you can expect to have a room that you share with 3 other people, and probably some sort of inflatable thing that you think on, or that you sleep on, so, and also think on. So that's the Patterson School, and that's graduate education more writ large. So with that, I'd love to have or to entertain any questions you have about the first half, which is sort of more general issues of graduate education, or the second half, which is Patterson in particular.
Beyond going to graduate school,
What do you recommend for students who might be interested in the Foreign Service?
Learning a ton about foreign affairs, keeping as updated as possible about current events, international events, which is a little bit more complicated than it used to be. So for me, it was very simple because I got a subscription to the New York Times, and so I read the international section of the New York Times, and that left me, fairly well educated about what was going on in the international system. The way that we consume media now is so much different than the way we consumed media 20 years ago, and so being informed is a different kind of thing, right? Still a good idea to read the international section and the domestic section of the New York Times because you're going to learn a lot. But there are a lot of other sources that are also going to be important to follow. Foreign Service exam. The Foreign Service does not require that you have extensive international travel, but it's going to be good. The Foreign Service does not require any specific language, but the harder language you learn, the better. And you do need a language to graduate from the Patterson School, not to get in, but to graduate. A clean record is also important, and that's true not only for the Foreign Service, but also for the intelligence community in particular. Right? There's a lot of concern. When I say a clean record, right, everybody has smudges here and there, but being able to keep yourself out of trouble is a pretty important thing when you're engaged going into public service. So I would say all of those things, really.
And a follow-up question to that, does involvement, having done the Peace Corps, offer any advantages to graduate school admissions and to jobs in the field?
Graduate school admissions, the answer is yes. So when we see anybody who's done the Peace Corps, that's immediately somebody we know. A, they have international experience. B, they can do stuff internationally, which is not always the case, right? Some people want to do a career in development, go to Ghana, leave after 3 days because they just cannot handle living in a developing country. And with your Peace Corps, then we know you can manage it. So yes for graduate admission, yes for a lot of government jobs, Peace Corps is helpful. Bad for some, right? So, and the common one that's sort of well known is the CIA, right? That there is a sort of iron wall between the CIA and the Peace Corps, really to protect both. And so there are some things that Peace Corps just will foreclose, but generally speaking, yes, it's a really clear indication you're interested in international affairs and you want to do something. I'm right about that, Mike. I mean, Peace Corps and CIA is
Yeah, they aren't very compatible.
yeah. Right, and I mean, Peace Corps does not want to have any questions about that they might be CIA, and CIA is respectful of that. So. Other questions? Yeah.
So at what point, perhaps, will the Patterson School think about being more flexible in terms of being part-time for students?
Right. That's a really good question. What I will say is that there are a variety of alternative pressures on the Patterson School for which direction that we want to go. The faculty, including myself, are steadfast in not going the direction you want us to go, or that your question implies we should go. Because we love being able to get students there and to have them all the time, right, and to make all fantastic co-curricular activities. Like we have 2 simulations and a conference and a trip and all this other stuff. So from the point of view of the faculty, it's like, no, we want to stay. But the student body is changing. The University of Kentucky is changing. Administrative pressures are changing. And there are a lot of programs that are very much like ours that are adopting more part-term programs. And it would not at all be surprising to me, it would be a little deflating, but it would not be surprising to me to see the Patterson School move in something like that direction in the few years. The Martin School has moved to some degree. Martin School is our partner, sort of partner school, has moved in that direction, and a number of our competitor schools have moved in that direction too. So I would say pay attention, because it might, despite what I feel, we may be moved in that direction, in which we'll move in that direction and we'll adopt ourselves.
Well, along those lines, a certificate program, perhaps, postgraduate certificate program, is that something that you all have considered as well, or has there been a request for that?
There hasn't been a request for that, although there's been an explosion of different certificate programs at UK. There is an undergraduate international certificate that, you know, if some administrator thought a lot about doing it, and they might try to adapt to graduate education. There are also a variety of certificates that we encourage, to some extent, our students to take. And so they can do this while studying at Patterson. Well, there's a statistics certificate, which I actually have myself considered getting, and I finished, I think, 2 of the 6 courses that I needed to finish in it. There's also a global commerce certificate that's achievable without too much trouble from being in the Patterson School and so during your time at Patterson. I think there's an agricultural science certificate, or agricultural policy certificate that can also be achieved. Those are the 3 that jump out at me, but there might be more. And again, you know, in the future you might see somebody trying to put together an interdisciplinary international studies certificate at the graduate level. I wouldn't be surprised. Other questions?
Must have some questions.
What do you look for in the ideal student who is applying to be a part of the program?
338 GRE, 4.0 GPA from West Point. You know, 15 years experience in the international stage and outstanding writing skills that explain to us why they absolutely need to be at the Patterson School and why they'll be such a tremendous addition to us. Very, very broadly, we approach it from a tripod. And so the tripod is undergraduate experience, which is very broadly based around GPA, but that's not everything. So you can't just, when you're in a graduate program, you can't just look at the GPA, because there are a lot of people out there who wanted to do pre-med and found themselves in OChem and their entire freshman year disappeared. And so you got to pay attention to what the GPA actually says and what classes they've taken, right? So you can't just look at GPA. GRE is misleading and problematic and the only thing that we can compare students across, and so we have to use GRE to do some comparison, some baseline comparisons of students. And then what we call interesting personness. And interesting person, especially for a small program like ours, you know, we have 35 people in and we want them to fit together in a particular way, and we want our students to learn from each other in the same way that they learn from faculty, and we, the faculty, want to learn from the students, right? So an interesting personness can just be a whole bunch of different stuff, like international experience. For someone who's coming straight out of undergraduate, a great idea that they convey to us in their letters of recommendation and in their personal statement and in something else, some other way that they've assembled. Military service is always good for interesting personness. Yeah, I mean, that one is just sort of very ambiguous, but stuff that makes you stand out to the admissions committee is this person would be not just great, but, you know, absolutely have to have for the Patterson School, just for the sake of the other students. Right now, for example, we have a professor from Berea, right? A French professor from Berea who's taking Patterson School, is getting his master's degree at Patterson. And he has a lot to offer the other students. It's really fantastic. I mean, he's down career, but really, and he scored well in these other things, as you would expect, but interesting personness was very high.
Yeah, to my knowledge, we have one student at Patterson School from EKU right now, and he had a very high GPA to start with. On top of that, he minored in Japanese. He took every Japanese language course we had here. Our Bluegrass State Intelligence Community Center of Academic Excellence sent him to Japan for a summer so that he could do cultural immersion. He got our certificate in intelligence studies, and he was heavily involved as a CAE scholar. Yeah. You know, so.
And those are all fantastic indications that you're a serious person. You know, myself, so I had that list of people up, the list, so PhD, JD, and MA. And of that, you know, I did a PhD, my wife did a JD, but my favorite people in the world are MA students because they're really committed to, they have a basic set of skills, but then they're far more committed than undergraduates to what they're knowing. And they don't stay around for 7 years, which is really nice.
In my first career in the Coast Guard, I spent 2 years as the Coast Guard attaché in the American Embassy in Bogota, Colombia. And I didn't speak Spanish when I got assigned that job. So I had to go to the State Department's language school for a year. and try taking intensive Spanish for a year. And that's where State Department sends their Foreign Service officers and some of their other staff folks to also learn languages before they go overseas. And what I found is that there were generally two types of Foreign Service officers in that program. One were those who graduated from some of the best international affairs graduate programs in the country, which includes the Patterson School. And the second ones were lawyers. The State Department has a huge need for lawyers.
Right.
And so I always tell all my students when I'm counseling that the three hardest jobs to get in the federal government is the State Department, CIA, and the FBI. And all of those, they want you to have something higher.
Right, right. NSA can also be really,
Yeah.
really difficult. But NSA is one of the only places that hires. No, that's wrong. Right, undergraduates can find their way into the intelligence community, but one way is through being a math major and the NSA. So
There's a lot of jobs out there.
well, thank you so much for coming,
Thank
and
you.
I very much appreciate it.
We always thank Dr. Farley for coming, and we have a certificate of appreciation for you coming and presenting to us today.
Well, thank you so
I'm
much.
sure we'll see you in a lot of our ICCA events.
Yep, I try to make them